Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Lisa Jackson, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is what we do. I love that we can be live on LinkedIn. It's one of the best upgrades to the show because we get to talk professionally about things, and folks who are professional get to hear about it. And look, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, right? It's a lot of people saying like, I'm an empath. I don't meet anybody that goes, oh, I'm crappy at that, right? And so that kind of gives me an idea that, hey, maybe we're pushing that too hard. I also don't hear a lot of people talking about cultural intelligence and how one or an organization struggles to create and shape these things, especially without a guide like you, like me, the other people that are out there that do this stuff. I mean, David Livermore is probably the biggest name in the industry, but culture is not something. Look, I always say culture is omnipresent. It's like gravity. It's there, always taking an impact on what you do. And if we don't take it seriously, and I would also say that emotional intelligence is subordinate to cultural intelligence, because if you're good culturally, then you can really have a chance to compete when it comes to culture and what it does to your business. What are your thoughts on that overall thesis?
So that's a very interesting posit that you would say emotional intelligence is subordinate. I think if you've got a workplace, whether it's a team of 5 people, 3 people, or 10,000 or 100,000 people in an organization. And I, by the way, I'm a big believer that team cultures are the power engine of any organization. So it isn't really possible to have a company culture that's the same for 100,000 people or even 10,000. That, you build culture at that team level, and the tone is set by a leader. And if a leader doesn't have that ability to tune in to other people's experience and show empathy, I think you're right. Culture still exists. So it's just whether it's functional or not.
Yeah. And I would say this is why I think it's subordinate. And I'm prepared to be wrong on this. It's subordinate because if your culture is poisoned, the emotional intelligence is irrelevant because you're not getting to the root of that problem. So many of these problems are cultural problems, like the vaccination conversation that we're having. If you are emotionally smart, but it disagrees with your culture, you're not going to convince someone who doesn't want to get a shot that they need to get a shot. You can do things that are culturally insensitive and dismissive, like present numbers, present legislation that forces. And this is, by the way, just so everybody understands, I'm not for or against vaccination in this. I'm just talking about when you take these approaches into a cultural group, the ones that want to get a vaccination are already there. They're already there. So you're trying to move the immovable.
Right.
And if you use emotion, well, okay. But I think if you focused on culture and then brought in emotion where it needed to be, I would suggest that you're going to more reliably get to where you want to get to.
I'm just thinking about that. I'm pausing on that because I think that's right. I think if you have an organization that has set a tone of toxic leadership from the top, and that can happen through a founding CEO who had a certain point of view that business is business and the people side of it doesn't really matter. You're just hired hands. And then there's a lot of yelling and screaming and abusive behavior that goes on in that culture. I don't think that the people who bring that type of perspective of people do deserve to be seen and heard and valued are going to stick in that culture. So that is exactly, it's a self-reinforcing thing. And then it also, but I think, as we move into the conversation about the Great Resignation, which I also call the Great Reset, there's just a level setting that's happening in our society on both sides, the employee side, the employer side. And I think that what that's pointing at is that these types of leadership that were generationally appropriate when I was starting my career, and you can tell by I'm seasoned, right? I'm not the young millennial kind of employee. There has been a massive value shift that's happening as well in the workplace. And so you use the metaphor of vaccination. And I think that what's happening is that there's just a movement of people who are looking for emotional intelligence in the workplace now, when that wasn't even considered a thing 20 years ago. There was still pockets of people who wanted, but just wasn't as widely accepted as a truth that people deserve that, as well as people are, it's not even just a deserving thing, they're voting with their feet. And right. There's a lot of people in this, I guess, in the work age range, in the sort of the age range in which they are prioritizing work or career, who are looking at very different options than the traditional career. And, some of that has to do with freelancing. Some of that has to do with, I'm just going to do contractor gig work until, I have enough money in my bank account, and then I'm going to quit working for a while and take sabbaticals. There's people who are in the workplace that are demanding sabbaticals, from work. And so there's all these different needs that I think are happening and competing with one another. And it gets really tricky in leadership, Pete, because it isn't like a simple yes or no, do I take the vaccine or not question.
Right.
It really gets to employers having to really put a very important question on the table, which is, what is our, we call it culture, but what is our point of view, and what is our position on the people side of our business? Where are we going to put our stake in the ground with that? And that and what's tricky about it is there's a lot of employers who I think give lip service to these values that we're talking about people-centric values and emotional intelligence, but they do it because they know they're supposed to, not because they really believe that those are important or that they value them themselves. It's sort of lip service. And I think that's coming to a head. There's a lot of disingenuity that comes out of that, and people are reading that.
Disingenuity. Yes, I like it. I want to spend a little bit more time on background here, and I think the vaccination conversation is a good one because it's problematic. And again, I'm gonna attack a little bit on the emotional intelligence folks. It's one thing to say you're an emotionally intelligent until, and this is where culture comes in again, until you receive emotions that you're not willing to process and disagree with you, and you're like, well, damn it, why won't you go get this shot, right? And then we lose that ability to culturally navigate through this. And me, I've said this a lot, and the people in the audience have heard me say this, and it's a little bit hard to understand, and I honestly struggle to explain it, but affect beats effect every time. And if you want to change culture, if you can't design an affect that works, and that's response to stimuli, then you're going to have a problem in terms of creating the culture that you want, because emotion is an accelerant for cultural design, I would say. The thing with that I want to bring up and have you talk about a little bit is if you put out a bunch of numbers and posts and condescending language, and I'm saying condescending because that's the affect that's created, right? If you create condescension in your message, it doesn't matter how many messages you put out to get a vaccination. If people are receiving, if the emotional response to your stimuli is F you, I'll never do it, you condescending, you don't create the culture that you want, and you're missing the emotional cues and getting the affect part wrong. So it doesn't matter how many messages you send out. If you continue to post about, like you think about the government's response here in California, and look, we've done a good job here, right? We're going to give you free lottery tickets. United Airlines, you might win a lottery and get free airline ticket. We don't want it. We don't want it. We don't want it. You're getting this response that says no, 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 no. And if you continue to put that message out, you're not going to change that because you haven't dealt with the affect part of the equation, which again, I think that goes back to the challenge on the emotional intelligence. Not that it's not important, but we have to be able to be willing culturally to hear an alternate emotion to the one that we think we're listening for.
Yeah. Then that's the crux point of emotional intelligence, isn't it? Empathy. Why is it that you don't want to get the vaccine? And the tone of how you ask that question and the way you pause and actually sit back and listen has everything to do with the response you're going to get and the effect that you're going to get. And I think that plays out in every realm of leadership. The vaccine is kind of a loaded topic right now because it's so polarizing.
Yeah.
But even in just day-to-day work, why do you need to leave work early? And that can play really different than, let's talk a little bit about why this is an urgent need, and then whether we can accommodate the urgent needs that we have, within that's an empathy approach rather than why do you need to leave work early? I don't get it. Yeah. And, I think that what's at play here and what's at stake here is that I've been watching a lot of webinars on this topic, the Great Resignation, what it means, and it is somewhat of a pent-up demand issue. So during COVID, turnover really declined. It took a giant dip, right? And now that things feel like they're softening, things feel like they're opening up, and it's not over, but there's a feeling that the end is in sight. You're seeing a pent-up demand for me making a choice to do something different is exploding. So there's there's different statistics that are quoted between 50 and 75% of people say they're looking for a new job this year. And so, but I think it's a meta, effect, as you pointed out, to this overarching power disparity between the employee and the employer. And that reset is employees saying, I'm taking my power back. Because face it, in the generation that you and I grew up in, Pete, that the people who took that position and said, I'm going to empower myself, I'm an entrepreneur. So I made that choice and I made great sacrifices for it, as have you. And that's the minority of our generation. And what you're seeing is, I think, a trajectory of we raised our children to have a voice, to be seen, to be mattered, and they're standing up to this power struggle and power dynamic in the workplace. And that's where I think that employers should be paying attention and not just throwing money at the problem.
No, this is great. I'm glad we finally brought the conversation over to the Great Resignation, because I think these things are important. We've just gone through a couple of decades of organizations redefining what an employee is, what kind of value they can create. And we've seen a whole lot of offshoring and mass terminations or layoffs, or whatever you want to call them. And that's compromised the integrity of that. Hey, we're about family here, and you're part of one team. And you're like, well, my buddy Jerry just got cut loose and walked out with a cardboard box, thought he had a job yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I think we've realized that this path to go somewhere, it's easy to look around and be like, I'm discarded here. I'm not valuable.
Right.
I'm next. And that I think feeds into this Great Resignation thing. I had this great image. I was trying to figure out what image to put in for our chat today. And what I put together is people are losing their minds trying to push a $15 an hour minimum wage, and the people losing their minds on both sides of the equation. So I put up a proposed budget for someone that makes $22 an hour, and it's shocking how little money $22 an hour is. I mean, your budget, this is adorable. Your budget for rent is not even $800 at $22 an hour. So when an employer comes to you and says, we're going to pay you $15, you're like, that's not even half of what I need to make as an adult with like a little kid, whatever, high school kid, whatever, right? But an adult, transportation costs in this budget were $300. I mean, that's a couple tanks of gas. That's 3 tanks of gas on my truck, right? $100 a tank. All of a sudden, I can't get around $300 a month for food. That's going to make me go, this isn't a viable path. I'm not even making $22 an hour. I'm making 15, and I get to 22, and I'm still going to be, this is how many years down the line is that? I'm still going to be broke, and you're going to be beating me up saying I'm not good enough. That's going to make me say, you know what? No, thanks. I'll do this on my own.
Over the last year and a half, we have proven that many jobs can be done remotely. And I always believed that to be the case. But the managers were like, well, if I can't see your butt in your seat, then I can't tell if you're working. And that's become bull crap, basically. At this point, everyone knows it's not true. Now, healthcare workers, food service workers, those are people that construction workers, you have to be on site to do your job. And those tend to be the lower paying jobs. And I think that what we have seen is with people, as you said, who are in the remote category, who have the option from anywhere, they went and found housing anywhere. So they could live in a place that had a lot lower cost of living. But in any marketplace, if you are relying on people for minimum wage work, those folks are going to have to either have a side hustle, carry on more than one job. And that's a bigger problem in the United States of America than probably what we're going to address today. And I'm not even sure that that's altogether behind the Great Resignation. I think that there is a piece of it that is that the livable wage problem that we have in our country is some form of a capitalism that is probably not sustainable. In other words, this whole piece about, economically that the middle class has basically shrunk and disappeared. That's a bigger problem than I think what employers feel like on an individual basis they can solve for. But you're right. That's the mentality of the person who's having to figure it out. If I'm making $22 an hour and $800 a month, as you pointed out, in rent, that's not going to get me in where I live in Denver, Colorado. That is not going to get me my own place. And there's no way I could ever buy a home on that.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of things that come out of that might be good. So I have two children, age 27 and 24. Both of them have always lived with other people in homes where there was 4 people sharing the rent. And that kind of community living is not a terrible thing, right? There's this kind of mentality our generation had that if you didn't have your big 3,000 square foot home, you were a failure. But then you're isolated and there's no way neighbors ever talk to each other. So there's some social dynamics at play there, I think, with the housing part that may end up playing themselves out in favor of more social connection. But I still believe that we come back to, why are people resigning? Why are people leaving their employment? And so you've talked a bit about the loyalty not being a two-way street. That's a huge, huge mindset issue among the younger generations. They don't have any loyalty. And I was listening to a webinar this morning on this topic, the Great Resignation and loyalty. It was really interesting because when you think about loyalty, I know you probably have your own very specific, powerful views on loyalty and what it looks like. And in the workplace, are you loyal to us as employees? Is the employer loyal to you? I think that's a very loaded word and in a very loaded concept, because loyalty, when you look at it from a family standpoint, it's that I will go above and beyond and do whatever it takes, right, to support you, to be a part of this family, to, it's more, I think, thought of as a family value. And this webinar was saying, I think it's an insult for an employer to call us family, because when push comes to shove, if they're in a difficult spot as an employer, what do?
Chop.
They do a layoff.
And they keep it a secret from you. They don't say, hey, we're having tough times, we're going to have some layoffs. Is anybody interested in, like getting out of here early? Or is anybody, now they just surprise you. They're like, surprise.
Exactly. And that has been talked about quite a bit in this wake of the pandemic. There were a handful of employers who did say to their folks, hey, either we have to lay off 20% or everybody has to take a salary cut. Or they even further entered into this is the amount of money that's going out the door that we can't cover. what solutions can we come up with? And then you'd have employees stepping forward and doing voluntary pay cuts. And that was happening. Granted, it was happening in smaller companies for the most part, that have a little bit more of a we're all in one space or building kind of cultural dynamic so that they could have those conversations sitting down with their people. But it is really a funny topic, loyalty. And what is it really to in the workplace?
So a CEO comes to you and says, hey, we really want to work on, we hear what you're saying. We want to improve our loyalty to a company, to a person, as a company. We want to do a better job of this. How do we reliably, can you even reliably do it? Can you create that affect when someone's like, yeah? Because I think more and more, look, we're looking at an 8-hour workday and saying it's not really 8 hours. That's really, for me, it's 11 and a half that I'm gone from the home. And then I get home and I'm exhausted. And so my leave time turns into TV time. And I'm just not, you're not paying me enough to do that. And by the way, don't ask for 1 minute more than 8 and hit the gate, because I'm barely doing this right now, right? If I can find something where I make less money and have more freedom, I'm gone.
I think that loyalty is hard to create a contract, a mutual contract, true mutual contract, reciprocal contract around loyalty when your goals are different. And, so if you come back to the family metaphor, in the case of loyalty in the family, the goal is to have this safe haven of a place and a group of people where you are always accepted for who you are, potentially. That's one goal. I'm not saying it's the only one. And in the workplace, the goals are misaligned. So I think loyalty in the workplace can be achieved if it's defined clearly in behavioral terms. So what does it actually mean to have loyalty here? It does not mean that either side can't terminate the relationship. It means that we will be kind about it. It means that we will be willing to engage in whatever those behaviors are. I'm just throwing out, I'm sort of a little bit hesitant to throw out too many definitions, because I think that loyalty means something different to different people. But in the workplace, I think it means the loyalty is the contract around we have sharing a common mission here. And we're all loyal to this mission, which has a beginning, middle, and end. And so, if I have, but in the end, it's a free agent world. There is no such thing. Non-competes are almost indefensible in court today.
That's right.
Employment standpoint. And so I think the loyalty has to be more of an earned concept in which I go through hard times as an employer and I show myself to be caring toward you in that regard, and caring toward, as this webinar this morning pointed out, and I just so resonated with it, an employee's number one commitment is not to your company. It is to their family and to their own personal needs. So if my mom is sick and you tell me I can't have leave to go take care of that, there are laws in our state now for that. But if you tell me I can't do it, I'm gone. Bye-bye. So it isn't a core value that I see on posters very often anymore. And I think it's partly because what we've entered into is a stage of our, the employment economy in which talent, the people who own the talent, depending on how rare your skills are, is something I own as the employee or as the person who's the seller of the talent. I own that. I don't any longer have to beg for that talent to be bought by somebody. And the more that your skills are developed in a direction that people demand and want, the more that is true. Freelance economy it's not all it's cracked up to be. There's a lot, as you know, that goes along with that in terms of other costs. You're going to spend a lot, even just the reality of double FICA, right? You're paying double Social Security, you're paying both sides of it. But it is a freedom. And that's what people want. today. They want freedom.
Let's stop. I want to talk about this specifically. I'm going to bring up a graphic here. As I was trying to define the image, I think the budget captured it for me. But you look at the message here. All I need is a beach and Wi-Fi, right? And this is a young lady in Tulum, Mexico.
Okay.
Digital nomad. And there isn't an image like that for corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
There's no like, oh man, this is going to be great. You're going to have your own cubicle.
Right.
You may be able to put pictures on the wall, but you had better put our own published documents up on the wall too, so we see that you're playing the game right. And and there is no image that compares to that. Like you said, this person is withstanding a lot of the challenge of freedom, right? And they've moved to Mexico in this case, and they're like, well, I know in Mexico it's going to be tropical and wonderful. I have a lot of people there who are expats, and my rent is going to be $400 a month.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, I've just cut my living costs in half, but I'm also not employable to a Denver company that needs me to be on site. Sorry, that's not going to happen. I'll take what I can get on my own. I don't know how a corporation competes with that reliably for someone who's willing to go be a digital nomad.
Exactly. And I think that's the real risk that large companies are facing right now is the talent. Maybe they haven't really fully grasped the weight of what is coming around this, because something like 60% of people said that if my employer demands I come back to the office, I'm quit. That's not even just I'm looking for another job. Right? That's really, truly like I own my choice now. And that's a very scary proposition if you are a senior corporate leader, and especially if you're over the HR, the talent recruitment part of the business. A lot more flexibility and choice is going to have to be part of the equation over the next 20 to 30 years. The digital revolution has been building for 30 years. And I remember reading a very interesting book called Navigating the Badlands. It was written by a woman back in the early 2000s who was a thought leader and futurist. And she would go into big companies and do future strategic planning. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of this. It's a very specific type of long-term strategic planning, thinking out 10, 20, 30 years for her clients. And there was this think tank they formed out of this, of different thought leaders across spectrums of they have, she formed this think tank out of people who were anthropologists, who were sociologists, who were economists, right? So they covered the whole gamut of the spectrum of points of view. And they studied what is going on right now. Things are not playing out, and this was in the late 90s, the way that they used to in business, where our plans don't seem to hold water anymore. And so they formed this think tank, and I always have actually said this, that history is the best informative. The future, in terms of studying the past, is a really, really important benchmark for being able to predict the future. And so they went back, I believe, to the dawn of writing, which is 4,000 years ago, and studied and found 8 disruptive innovation periods of society. And of course, the last one would be the first industrial revolution, that you could basically say was most of the 19th century. The digital revolution, each one of these massive transformational, what disrupted every part of society, was really crumbled during that innovation and rebuilt. And the people that rebuilt it were not the people who were in power. The people who rebuilt the new rules and the new structure of the society were, she has a name for them. They're the emergent leaders. But in our time, and so what she then said is, we are approximately at this time, I believe, again, early 2000s, maybe 2005 or so when this book was published, we're about 20 years, and these cycles take about 50 years to complete in every one of the cases of these 8 disruptive innovation periods. And we're about 20 years at this point into a 50-year cycle. The systems at that time were starting to crumble, but now fast forward to 2021 and just take a look at how everything feels to anybody's paying attention, like it's just crumbling, it's coming apart. There's nothing sort of stable anymore that we can sort of point to as a belief system or a shared value system in our society. And I just found that a really fascinating concept, and that the digital revolution, now we're about 30 some years into this cycle, we're going to see the younger generation coming into power, millennials coming into power in corporate America very soon. And to me, that they're going to change the rules. They're going to change the rules of work. And so I hope some of them are listening to this, and really accepting the mantle of that power. And we don't have to do things the way that we used to do them, but you still have mostly baby boomers occupying the C-suite in corporate America. And so it's like, what do you mean you want to work from home? That just means you want to sit around and watch Netflix all day. And the younger generations are like, that's not how it works. Productivity didn't even take a blip. During this pandemic, I worked my butt off. I just did it on my terms and my time. And I gave you the same result that you needed.
Yeah. And I got my laundry done while I was at work. And maybe that says something about the productivity you thought you were getting, not you, but the C-suite thought they were getting with their people when they were at work.
Yeah.
And realize just how hammered. Look, if you live in the Bay Area where I grew up and you have to live in Vacaville, there are a million residents between you and your workplace that you have to swim through to get to work, right? I'm not even exaggerating.
They're all in cars on their stuff by themselves.
Yeah, and someone will say, "Well, take the bus." Like, yeah, and that's not. I don't have 4 hours to get to work, right? And so I get there, and I'm hammered dog crap by the time I get there. Maybe I learned some French on the way. Maybe I just zoned out. And then I'm looking forward to that in the back end. So now I'm going to adjust my day, and I'm going to come early and work out. I'm going to stay late. Now I'm at work 10 hours. And it's like, these things aren't sustainable in the modern time. And I guess I would add to this
They're
too.
necessary. They're not only
necessary. You shouldn't have
necessary. Why would you put your people through that if you really value their needs? And that's part of what I think has been missing, is that the corporate feels like our needs trump yours, and they're not aligned. Right?
They are not in alignment. And also because employership is so transactional now. You were talking earlier about, like, I don't need to give you 2 weeks. I remember when I worked at CDW, my boss looked at me and said, I don't understand how to motivate you. Because I didn't care about getting like the booze cruise after hours. I'm struggling to keep my head above water financially. I'm working hard. You see my numbers. I'm not missing out on these things, but I'm struggling. You want to understand, you want to threaten my existence at a company with a job that asks too much of me and doesn't pay me enough. I can replace you. You're replaceable. And that's really, and this is 20 years ago, right? So when you look at employee now, there's even more telecommuting and ability to work digitally away from somewhere. There's really very little need to be doing accounting at the office or HR. There are so many HR functions that can be done remotely. So how do you now, if you're going to adapt, right? The corporate CEO is like, yeah, we want to do a better job of this. We're going to adapt and we're going to do more digital stuff. How do you now create a corporate culture? I mean, when everybody's so dispersed, I mean, that's the other conundrum, right?
Yeah. Well, and culture is just how you do your work. So the team, as I come back to where I started at the beginning, the team is the central unit of a culture. And so you can still create and still have a cultural element, even though you're working remote and you're coming up on Zoom. You bring up a very interesting point that I don't know that I have the answer to this, but I spent a lot of my early career was developing in-depth expertise in nonverbal communication and a particular body of work called neurolinguistic programming. And I have sort of a bias around how human beings connect that came out of that body of work, that it has pheromones, mirror neurons, all these kind of very technical terms about how human beings actually connect, develop relationship, develop rapport. And so I think there still is a hybrid model that is going to serve companies best by having certain events where they bring people together, certain kickoff events where, I've talked to people throughout this pandemic who feel burned out, who feel isolated. So this is the other part of it, that they don't have that social connection. And I'm like, I just started this job 3 months ago and I've never even met my teammates. And that still feels weird to us, that we would live in a completely digital world. So I think there's got to be some attention paid to that happy medium and really looking again at the team's purpose or its mission and what it's trying to accomplish as the foundation or starting point for determining how do you create a proper social structure for the mission. That's kind of how I look at it. And that you look at the work goals and the work processes differently, in the sense that, do we really need to be in person to do this? You said like accounting can be done from anywhere. There's a lot of functions that can be done from anywhere, but you also have to be a human element of it, because there is still something to the fact that we are social creatures. So I do believe in both, and I'm not an advocate of it as a one size fits all. I think it has to be looked at through that lens of what's the mission of the team, when does it need to come together in person, and when is it okay for people to have that flexibility to work from home and from anywhere that they want to.
Yeah, there are so many things to discuss within this, and I love that we're having this conversation. But this idea of the Great Resignation. Let's go back to the financial side of it. Right now we're going through this global pandemic, and as much as most of us are sick of it, it continues to rage on. I mean, there's a story every day of a medical system being overwhelmed or approaching max capacity. There's just people getting sick, and look, we're not just on the Delta variant, we're on the Lambda and climbing, and now there's a whole different variant that appears to be even more deadly, and maybe it doesn't break out, maybe it does. Yeah, it's like, this isn't stopping anytime soon. So we have this confounding factor that goes into all of this, and the government's doing what it has the ability to do, which is print money. Like they can, we're just going to print, $1,300 every 2 weeks and make it magically appear into your account, because what else can we do? We can barely keep it so that your landlord can't evict you, right? Like we're legally to even do that.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, they fixed it. Okay, good. Well, I guess the point here is that as we struggle with these big problems, corporations are having to work with this environment, and again, how do you make something? So okay, let me back up. We just had this whole failed thing in Afghanistan where we lost, and we were in full retreat, and that went like crap. I would have told anybody who was listening, and part of the problem is the military doesn't listen. Hey, we had lost this thing a long time ago because we weren't creating governance. We weren't creating a self-sustainable military. This was going to collapse because we didn't handle the cultural part right. We had no idea what their goals were. We had no idea how they made decisions. We completely ignored how much religion mattered. And these things, I think, are transferable to the marketplace, not only for the employer, but the employee. How do you set yourself up? So if I was to be interviewed, and that never happens, but if I was to be interviewed by a corporation and they wanted to consider me, they'd better be, as much as I'm supposed to be prepared, they'd better be prepared, because I will ask questions, because I want to understand exactly what we're getting into here, because I don't want just a job. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it hard, and I'm going to pour a lot of effort into this, and I have to believe in you. And I think we too often at this as a one-sided interview, but I don't, and that's probably why I don't ever get hired for anything. But I will work like a dog, but I'd rather do it for myself. So you're really going to have to convince me that this is worth my time.
Yeah. The social contract of lifetime employment is gone. That went out the window with the pensions. And so now that if you think that you hold all the cards as an employer, that's going to create a certain limitation on your ability to attract talent. It doesn't mean that won't happen. Some companies have such a reservoir of, or they have a monopoly on their city or whatever it is. I just read something very interesting about this today, that Nike, if you haven't heard this, just closed their office in their Seattle corporate office for a week, with the express purpose of, please, they said to all their employees, don't work, spend time with your family, refresh yourself, take care of yourself. LinkedIn, thank you for the broadcasting tool for us today, did the same. And there's a whole host of companies that are coming on board with that. And so I think that what we're starting to see again is that we go back to the mutuality of the relationship. Anytime that you have a one-sided relationship and where one party benefits more than the other, it's not sustainable. So I do think that you make a really important point, Pete, that people should be coming to the table now as employees or as prospective employees with, how will my well-being be taken care of by you? Here's what I'm going to work like a dog, as you said, or like a really hard, whatever that looks like. I'm going to give you my all. And that's been the expectation from the get-go. And there's this mindset from Taylorism, back in the 1920s, that people are lazy and don't want to work. People want to do what makes them feel valued and valuable. And we all have, I suppose, maybe different physical and emotional capacity for hard work, right? So there are some people that just are born that way. My daughter's one of them. She's still a hard worker and always was. My son was like, how little can I get away with and still meet the goal? And then, if you look at it from a school, and neither one of those, by the way, is bad. They just were different. But there has to be that feeling of my well-being is important. It's not any longer a one-way street. And I think, to me, if there was one thing that I would suggest from a culture standpoint that organizations should and must do in this time, it's to invest in developing leaders for a new era. To invest in developing leaders who have those emotional intelligence skills we started with, the ability for empathy, the ability to help people see a broader vision than just do your job, the ability to check in and be genuine. And number one at the front of all that is people who want to lead others. Because there's a lot of management right now by virtue of the fact that we have built an economy that and a corporate system that is based on the only way that you get a bigger paycheck is by being promoted into management. And that has promoted a whole lot of bad managers and leaders. They don't want to manage other people. But it's only pathway, right?
Right, yeah.
So changing that game is, I think the rules of the game is one of the most important. The work I do, I help, culture changes. You referred to with the Afghanistan, that was about imposing cultural values onto a system. Changing culture is really about allowing the new values to emerge that are already in play and desired, but the power structure has not allowed them to be.
Can I add an option C for that? I would say if Corporation A can accomplish its goals through the existing cultural paths, why change them? Right. And that was a problem in Afghanistan. It's like,
exactly.
Well, they need to adhere to rule of law. They have rule of law. You don't like it, but they have rule of law. So now, given this new dynamic, how do we accomplish, legitimizing a court? Well, we don't know how. Well, then let's not do that.
Yeah. I think that this Great Resignation is forcing the hand of a lot of companies to change and it's not actually just this digital this particular pandemic that has created an opening for a lot of people to re-examine, what do I actually want to do with my life? And that's what a lot of people are doing. But you also have the added fact that corporations themselves are being forced to change through the digital revolution. So, and that's a complex topic, probably a different, interview than what we're doing today. But that digital revolution is advancing, and so the cultural change has to happen there, which is sometimes brought companies kicking and screaming to it. Other times people are choosing it. There's certain industries like the technology industry that are leading with it, but everything is digital now. You just go to anywhere and you expect to be able to have an interaction. You buy things online, or you expect to be able to swipe a credit card and not have to talk to anybody. It's just an expectation that the world is digital now, and there are more cultural changes that are happening in the wake of that than in this more recent event of the pandemic. And I think it's just compounded the onus upon companies to figure it out. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to be an HR leader in this day and age, honestly, because you really are caught between a system that is, maybe trying to evolve or doesn't care about evolving, and the people who are, right? And you're sort of in the middle of this, and it must be intense.
Yeah, I've lived in tents, and little pun. Hey, so there's a thing I'm curious to it, and this is reset or the resignation adjacent, but I think it feeds into the pool that we're dealing with here. Is we take someone, well, we'll take me, because that way I don't have to talk about anybody else. I am in effect unemployable. One of the things was at CDW when I worked there, and this is a massive corporation. We the last CEO I know that worked there was hired from United because he knew how to take us to the next. I mean, this is a big company, and every person I know, and they went through a churn rate of about 90+% to figure out who was going to stick. Every person I knew and was friends with went on to other places. They all got promoted at somewhere else, right? They weren't able to find a future at this company. That worked desperately to train them, worked desperately to find them, identify them, and then for whatever reason they don't work out, and so that person goes and becomes, one of them became a C-suite level employee, right? Well, boy, wouldn't CDW, right? Yeah, for somebody else, right? So we have this problem of talent leakage, and then when talent shows up, so we'll go back to me again, right? I show up, it's Pete. I've got incredible experience. You would say, how is it relevant? Well, I mean, spying is sales, spying is reporting. I can work in any environment. There's no environment too rugged for me. I've worked, in excess of 100 hours a week for extended periods of time in a dangerous environment, cross-language, cross-culture, cross-religion, cross, working between two realities that were contrary to each other, the Afghan reality or Iraqi reality, and then the military reality. And I'm trying to balance the connection between there. I've got 2 degrees. I mean, all these things, right? Sounds like a guy that, if you look at my work on the Break It Down, over 1,000 episodes. Come on. Yeah, you know what? We have no use for you, right? I can apply to any job. I'm not going to get hired. I am not employable, not because I don't work hard, but because the system won't allow me to do anything. I applied when I first got back from Afghanistan. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to do something else now. And I applied to Salesforce. My friend worked there. He's like, I can get you in. I'm incented. I'll give you the bonus. I don't need it. Let's get you in. So I applied, and they're like, oh, you know what, Pete, you're too qualified for this job. And I said, okay, great. What's the next job up? They're like, oh, you know what? Underqualified for that one. So like, there was literally no spot for me at Salesforce, who was desperate to hire people, right? And so you have all these young.
And there's something too, I want to just, this is a really sensitive topic, and I want that I'm gonna speak to in response to that. But I think we can go there. I just read this in the last day that there's a LinkedIn HR expert who talks daily about matters of HR, and he was talking about how leaders hate to do succession planning. This is going to sound like a little bit of a right turn from where you were going. And he said it's a lot. He said succession planning is one of these topics that's a lot like hiring veterans. Everybody says, every single person in a leadership roundtable, in a boardroom or whatever, will say, yeah, we're all about hiring veterans, but then they never do. And
That's right.
They actually not only never do, but they only give them the crappiest jobs. And, and he went on to talk about culture or succession planning was similar. Nobody wants to actually figure out the leadership pathway in an organization. So I think that some of what's happening is there are these predisposed mindsets that happen in recruiting, that if you don't fit a certain profile, if you have one of these red flags that we decide are, this person's going to flip out on PTSD or whatever the mindset is that has people in companies not hire vets, that's something that I think we're going to see change in the next 10, 20 years because of necessity. That if you've got to hold so it'll be interesting to see where it goes, because there's a lot of different futurists that talk about the freelance movement is not sustainable, and that corporate, but I believe that we're going to start to see something emerge that I've been paying attention to and reading about, called stakeholder capitalism, which is that capitalist, you're seeing a lot of pressure and divisiveness in America, and that has to end. That you can't stay polarized forever in a country and still call yourselves the United States of America. I mean, who knows where it'll end up? But I think that with the hiring, coming back to the hiring piece, that employees are going to demand and be owed and be given a stake in some way in the companies that they are aligning themselves to. And if not, that supply and demand will take care of it, because right now the supply is in power in a big way, right? In terms of just they're voting with their feet, and they will not. The number one, you tell me, what's the number one reason a person leaves their job?
That they choose to, a life circumstance outside of the job would be my guess.
No, they hate their boss. It's truly, that really boils down to being the simplest reason. That if I have a relationship with you and you're my manager and you're making my life easy, you're giving me rewards, you're giving me, I'm going to think hard about leaving. And I mean, and there is a whole movement toward, like, I have to like my work too. Right? I have to like.
I'm going to ask about this, because this is interesting to me. If you have a boss who's created this environment, like, employees are expensive to find and train and bring up to speed, right?
Yeah.
And I'll use me, not to use anybody else, right? When I worked at CDW, they said, "Oh, we're going to train you. We're going to get you up to speed. We're always going to help support you." And that never happened. The manager was too busy doing things for the corporation and for people above him. And we were just left to swim or survive. And they raised the goal each month. And it's like, hey, you actually don't care about me because you're not acting like you do.
Yeah.
And so I didn't so much hate my boss, but my boss did nothing to make me want to stay.
Hate is too strong a word, but I definitely don't have an allegiance to it's really that relationship with that person that determines whether or not I'm going to stay or leave. Because that person, if they're doing their job as a leader, they're asking me, how are you doing? On a fairly regular basis, in a more specific version of that. And that may become clear that I need a different assignment in a different company. A really good boss will let me do that. They'll let me go. They'll sort of say, you belong on this team over there, because they need you more than, we need you too, but like, they need you, and this is going to be a better opportunity for you. So if I have a leader or a boss who is in favor of my growth and development, you're going to see a lot less turnover in those companies, for sure.
And I would challenge anybody who's trying to be a good leader. Are you leading a process and a status sheet up to hire, or are you leading people? Because if you are, you should know their personal situation. You should know their professional aspiration. You should be looking for opportunities to get them off your team to a higher level. I mean, what's more leader than that? Hey, I can make a new one of you. What I can't do is turn you into this Microsoft expert and improve our relationship with one of our biggest business partners. Let's get you out of this role and up to something else. Like, I don't even know why you're still here talking to me right now. We don't take that approach, because we don't, as corporations as a whole, and I'm being unfair, we don't as a whole understand how to do that and the value of getting people higher up in the organization so they can create value in other ways. Instead, it's like,
or doing work that they love. Because if they're doing work they love, they're going to be an asset to the organization, not to just my team. And so developing leaders, to me, is the number one remedy against the Great Resignation, is really truly coaching and developing leaders to have not just emotional intelligence, to have like workforce intelligence and understand the job of a leader, which is not the easiest job to do if you're doing it well, but to really understand what that job is, and that it isn't just showing up with, I get a bigger paycheck and I boss people around. It's challenging people. It's allowing people to move and grow around the company. It is accountability to the organization's goals. It is the emotional well-being of the people. So it's not an easy role that we're talking about here, but there are plenty of people who are really well suited for it, who've never even had the chance to be in it. because they don't have the right pedigree, they don't have the right education, they don't have the right resume.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, talking about hiring veterans. This is not me on my soapbox, but this does give us an example of what this looks like. So if you are serious about hiring veterans, or fill in the blank of whatever it is that you're trying to do, you must act like that, right? So our goal is to hire veterans. We're going to put a veteran on they're going to make one of them a stakeholder, maybe the main tent pole of this effort. And then the moment a veteran resume pops up into the queue on HR, we're going to respond. It can be a robot response. Hey, we see that you're a veteran. We want to set up a time to talk to you. That's how you approach a problem like that, by taking direct action and acting like you actually care about these people. We suck at hiring veterans. Let's go do it as crappy as we can for the next 3 years and get better at it by getting some veterans around us so we can do it better. Because you're right, we are underemployed. I mean, someone comes in like I led 5,000 people and deployed them to combat. I had over $1 billion worth of equipment under my charge. We lost none of it. I brought everybody home. I did these impossible things. Great. Sounds like you could work on the security office under our security manager. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I promoted 10,000 people in my career. Let's not put anybody underneath you. These are the things that happen. And I'm using veterans. I think it's a powerful example.
Yeah.
If you don't act like you want to get better at it, if you don't accept the pain of learning it, if you look around, I love stakeholder meetings. I love stakeholder analysis. Who are the stakeholders? It's a company. Like, I don't see a single customer in this meeting. Are the customers not a stakeholder? No, they're not. They're the customer. Like, well,
yeah, then
you're wrong, because how can they not hold a stake? They have the money. They have the actual stakes that you want to get. Come on.
Right. And that's been a part of one of the tenets of my cultural change, is really to do that, to bring in the customer point of view first and foremost, not just like even, an actual customer, but if you want to start hiring veterans, start bringing veterans into focus groups and find out who they are and what they need. And so the customer can be internal, they can be external, but they are the person who you are trying to attract. Or convince, or otherwise, extract something from, right? It's like the person, I mean, in the nicest way, you're trying to serve a certain person or population of people, and that can be inside your company or outside. So I agree. I think that the customer, if you're going to get into hiring a certain, broadening to a certain population, and that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion kind of world that we live in today is so much more ripe for this. Then start bringing the people to the table that you're trying to give more opportunities to, find out what it is that they can bring to you, what it is that they need from you. And, I mean, I feel the same way as you. I feel unemployable at this point. I often feel, and I'm just going to say this, at my age, my ripe old age of 58 years old, that I'm almost considered by the younger set as irrelevant. In the workplaces, that there's this kind of, you're a baby boomer, which I'm actually think I'm Gen X. I can't remember quite which category I fall right on the cusp. I feel more like
and what an intolerant thing to say to someone to
it's not ever
have
said.
a generation.
It's not ever said. And that's part of what, that gets into the DEI kind of world, is that these prejudices are never really, well, they are sometimes stated out loud, but rarely in the workplace. They're just these very, very limiting mindsets. And so I do think a lot of what you're seeing on the supply end, on the talent end of the equation, is people who are saying, I'll take charge of my own destiny and my own career. And some people, like myself, feel more empowered to do that than others. There are people with true limitations around that, whether it's mindset or physical or whatever the limitations are that they carry, that for whom that's not as easy. And I think those people still deserve and can do great work, and deserve the opportunity to be seen through a more neutral lens. So I hope that is an outcome of this, as organizations are struggling to find good people, that they start opening up to. There is very truly age discrimination, there's racial discrimination, there's vets discrimination, there's all kinds of discriminations. Like, we want this kind of person. People develop personas, in a room, in a boardroom, and say, this is the type of person that's going to fit our culture, rather than, really starting to look at again, coming back to the team culture is the most important thing, and that you have people who can gel together, can become a great team together, and that might not be a persona the way that you think it is.
Yeah, and again, using the veteran lever for this, because I think it's a good example. If we want to hire veterans, so we're going to bring a veteran in at least to help consult us on how to do this, or have one of our veterans sit on these conversations. I don't think there's a veteran out there that would say I speak for all veterans, because we are inclusive.
I love Sarah's comment.
Oh yeah,
is serious about hiring veterans as greeters. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, and that's anybody, right? Like if one of the things they always say to me, back when I was actually trying to find a job, like, and here's how unemployable, I don't even bother anymore. Like there's no point. Right?
Right.
It literally makes me want to kill myself, because I'm like, I'm irrelevant. I don't even exist. Why do I matter? That's really what happens. And this is the answer to this.
It's a very, very humbling exercise for sure. Trying to for a job. I
used to do impossible stuff. My judo is as strong as anybody in the military at what I do, and I'm not valuable to anybody in anything. And so if we don't know what it is to be a veteran, and you just have one in the room, maybe that person's a great person, but maybe they had a completely different existence than the next veteran, which they did. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we do. We're so diverse. And I wouldn't say racially, that's easy. Ethnically, we're so diverse. We have people from all over the world in the American military. So to think that you can understand the veteran condition by having one veteran around, that's impossible. There's no way to get that reliably right. And I think any veteran would say that, you're going to need more than me. It is a lot of stuff that we don't all know about that. But again, you have to take serious action to improve these cultural aspects and accept that you're going to make a mess, right? I mean, cultural change is not pretty, as you know. Like you can here's our culture. All right, well now let's go study it. Oh, that's hard. What if
that is a lot of what happens with my work. This is reminding me of a conversation I was having with there's a couple of colleagues that have built a business around combating ageism, which is a very specific thing about if you're over 40, it's really hard to get hired as well. And we had this whole conversation. I had posited this, like, let's do sometime, I don't know, a YouTube video or something on what if you chose in your hiring process to do it like The Voice. Blind auditions, right? So you're just auditioning people based on whether or not they can, you come up with some work sample, right? Some way in which, whether it's a series of questions or some way in which a person can demonstrate, right, whether or not they can do the job. And then you do blind auditions. You literally can't see the person. All you can do is hear them, or maybe it's a work sample that they provide. You don't see a resume, which are really not, I think, the best tool for introducing someone at this stage of the game. But I thought, and we just went off on that. We had such a good time talking about that. What would change in the recruiting world if you did auditions like The Voice for jobs? They're really different people.
I often say that, with all these organizations that help veterans get jobs, I often say to them, okay, first off, what do you expect to earn? Well, I've got a secondary degree, 20 years of experience, and I live in Orange County. I expect to make 6 figures.
Yep.
Then we're goofing around. Let's just be honest, we're goofing around. Because if a company wants to hire me with my pedigree and they want to pay me $35,000, that's not a good fit.
Yeah.
They don't value me, and I promise you, I'm not going to value them, right? So these are things
you're always open for another opportunity,
constantly. Right. And so, we've been talking for over an hour. I don't want to keep you for too long.
Sarah's really on it. Every group is comprised of individuals, and this is a concept that organizations love to ignore.
Right. Well, we want the stakeholders here.
Yes.
Yeah. And we can do this again, and we should. So I don't want to keep any longer. And I actually have a kickoff for a project that I'm going to start soon. So I have to go do that.
Well, thank you for entertaining this really important conversation about the times that we live in. And the Great Resignation is a big thing. So by the time this actually airs on your podcast, it'll be interesting to see how it's playing out.
Well, it's out. It's live. We were just live to LinkedIn. We're live on YouTube.
Okay.
And so if anybody wants to get a hold of Lisa, corporateculturepros.com. That's the best way to grab her.
Yeah.
There are so many more things I want to say. I love the idea. I'm just going to say this stuff anyhow. If we go a little long, it's fine. If I would say, if a company just put me in front of the CEO, and if they don't think I'm valuable, let me do a live audition. Here's what I can do. Here's the kind of things I've done. And if they're not enraptured and going, wow, we can use a guy like this, then fine. I'll walk out and I'll never apply again. And this is your one shot to get me. But you have to open the door. If your door is not open, and I'm telling all corporations right now, your door is not open wide enough. Robert Coombs did, and we talked about this yesterday and we were chatting on the phone. Robert Coombs is a guy, he's got a job now, but he wanted to leave the nonprofit sector. He was great at his job, highly skilled, had built a very successful nonprofit, built a fantastic team. They didn't need him in there anymore. He's like, I want to do something else. And so he tried to find a job, couldn't find one. So he's like, I'm going to build a job finding robot. And so he did. It started sending out resumes for him and custom cover letters. This guy's this good, right? And here's what he learned. Listen, corporate America, listen to HR people. No one's reading the cover letters. No one's reading the resumes.
Yeah,
His robot proved it. He specifically tuned it. He's like, let me test this theory. And there's a whole episode with him. Robert's awesome. So you're not listening. Your door is not open enough. You should be overwhelmed with people that you're like, oh my God, look at this great candidate. Look at this great candidate. And if you're not valuing the candidates that are out there, and you're creating this great resignation.
Because the person that's reading the cover letter, the resume, is either a bot, or if they're a human there, know that they have to check a certain set of criteria for the person upstream that's going to hire. And there's just not a lot of openness in those steps in between.
That's if they read it.
Bringing that forth, because that is truly opening up your mind to the kind of person that can contribute in ways you never even imagined, is probably the biggest promise and hope I have out of this stage of our country in terms of hiring and keeping and retaining amazing people. You just haven't seen what amazing can look like yet, for sure.
And I think you are amazing, Lisa. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm going to push this button. Stand by for 1 second.